The wind doesn't just blow here, it screams. It's a thin, high-pitched sound, the noise of a universe trying to scour the flesh from your bones. For the past 6 months, that scream has been my only constant companion. My watch post, a titanium-reinforced cubicle I call the coffin, is buried 10 feet deep in the glacial ice of the Winter Crown, a jagged spine of rock and frost in Alaska's Brooks Range that mapmakers usually leave blank. Outside, the polar night is absolute, a blackness so complete it feels heavy, and the temperature is holding steady at 40 below zero. Inside, the recycled air hums, and the faint green glow of my instrument panel is the only light I've seen for weeks. I am Jedediah Stone, 42 years old, a former Marine Scout sniper, and the last man on a very long, very lonely wall. My movements are economical, honed by years of discipline and a decade of this specific solitary vigil. I run a systems check, my gloved fingers dancing across the touchscreens. Satellite link, 5 bars. Geothermal sensors, nominal. Perimeter cameras, frosted over as usual, but the motion detectors are still active. Everything is green, everything is quiet. Too quiet. My rifle, a custom-built 50 BMG with a thermal scope, leans against the bulkhead. Its weight is a familiar comfort. The rounds in the magazine are my own design, a secret passed down and improved upon through generations. A depleted uranium core surrounded by a cryo-exothermic gel. They're designed to do more than just punch a hole. They're designed to inflict a thermal shock so violent it can shatter something the size of a city bus. I hope to God I never have to find out if they work as advertised. My gaze falls on the only anachronism in this high-tech tomb. Lying on the console is a compass, its housing carved from the ivory of a long-extinct mammoth. It belonged to my great-great-grandfather, Amos. It doesn't point north. For the 10 years I've been making this pilgrimage, its needle has remained stubbornly fixed, pointing straight down into the heart of the mountain, until tonight. Now it's twitching, a faint, almost imperceptible tremor, like a nerve firing in a dead man's hand. The needle shivers, pulling a few degrees to the east, then back. A cold knot tightens in my gut, a feeling I recognize not as fear, but as inevitability. It's the same feeling I had as a 12-year-old boy, sitting by my grandfather's bed as he coughed his last breaths into the dry air of his room. The fire in the hearth crackled, a stark contrast to the rattling in his chest. Grandpa William looked like a collapsed ruin, his face a roadmap of scars and wrinkles. The one leg he had left was a bundle of sticks under the quilt. He pushed a heavy, leather-bound book into my hands. Its cover was worn smooth by the touch of generations. "This is your memory now, Jed," he'd rasped, his voice thin as autumn leaves. "Everything we are, everything we've done, it's all in there." He seized my wrist, his grip surprisingly strong. "You have the blood, and with the blood comes the duty. When the time comes, you can't run, you can't hide. You have to be the one who stands on the edge and says no further." You swear it. I was just a boy, smelling the sickroom odors of rubbing alcohol and decay. But I saw the terrifying conviction in his faded eyes. "I swear," I whispered. He told me about the crown of winter. He told me about the oath. And he told me about the monster. We call it the Frost Colossus in the journals. The old Athabascan tribes who lived and vanished from this land had another name for it. Vetriotnar, the winter giant. It hibernates for a century, sleeping in a geothermal vent deep beneath the glacier. It's not a beast of flesh and blood in the way we understand it. It's more akin to a geological event, a living force of nature. It doesn't eat, not in the traditional sense. It consumes heat. It drains the life from the very rock, drawing geothermal energy into itself. And in doing so, it triggers earthquakes, flash freezes, and avalanches that can reshape the landscape for 1,000 miles. It's a predator of planetary proportions, and my family has been the world's secret immune system for 500 years. A low vibration shudders through the coffin. It's not the wind. It's deeper, a resonant hum that seems to come from the core of the Earth itself. On the screen, the geothermal sensors flare from green to amber. A temperature spike, 3 miles down, right where the compass is pointing. The quiet hum, my grandfather called it in his entry, the first sign. The mountain clearing its throat before it screams. My training takes over. I pull on my outer gear, a thermal-layered exosuit that whirs softly as it powers up. The helmet seals with a pneumatic hiss, and the world outside the viewport is replaced by the crisp, digital feed of the heads-up display. I unlatch the coffin's hatch. The wind hits me like a physical blow, stealing my breath despite the rebreather. Before I move, I perform the ritual. It's a small thing, a tradition started by Amos himself. I remove my glove and press my thumb against the serrated edge of my combat knife, drawing a single bright red drop of blood. I let it fall onto a silver dollar from 1824, the year of his first hunt. I place the coin on a flat, wind-scoured rock at the edge of the abyss. A tribute, a declaration, an offering to the ghosts of the mountain and the memory of the men who died here. It's a way of looking the monster in its unseen eye and saying, "I am here. A stone has come to meet you." The shivering in the ivory compass intensifies. The needle is vibrating wildly now, locked onto a point deep in the darkness below. The quiet hum grows into a tangible tremor, the ice groaning under my magnetic boots. The wait is over. 10 years of watching, a lifetime of preparing. It has all led to this single moment. I retreat into the coffin, the hatch sealing behind me with a solid thud. My fingers fly across the console, activating a shielded, encrypted satellite transmitter. The target address is a single receiver at a private airfield in Fairbanks, where my team is waiting. They are the best of the best, specialists I've handpicked over the years, the only people on this planet I trust with this secret. The message is 6 words. 6 words my grandfather wrote in his journal, the same 6 my own father would have sent if he'd lived long enough. The crown has awakened. It's time. The long watch is done. The hunt has begun. The journey from the crown to our forward operating base, codenamed Watchtower, is a 2-hour descent in a tracked pressurized vehicle that's more submarine than Snowcat. Watchtower is a collection of modular, insulated habitats set up in a sheltered valley at the foot of the Brooks Range, a temporary beachhead against an ancient enemy. The thunderous clatter of a CH-47 Chinook's twin rotors fills the air as my team finishes unloading the last of our gear. The bird lifts off, its wash kicking up a blinding cloud of snow. And then there's only the vast, oppressive silence of the Alaskan wilderness again. While my team organizes the equipment, I retreat to the command module. It's my space, dominated by a large holographic map table and the reinforced locker where I keep the true heart of our operation, the journal. The book feels heavy in my hands, a weight of history and blood. I open it to a specific page, the vellum yellowed and brittle. The ink is faded, the script the elegant, looping cursive of a man from another time. October 17th, 1824. The Koyukon people call it a spirit, a thing of wind and ice that wakes to devour the heart of the mountain. They are wrong. This is no spirit. It is a creature of flesh and bone, if such a thing can be said of a beast made of living glacier. I saw it with my own eyes. It rose from the ice like a god of old, its hide the color of a blizzard sky, its horns like shards of obsidian. It stood taller than any pine, and its roar was the sound of a mountain breaking in two. The elders had tried to appease it with offerings, but their shaman was the first to die, frozen solid in an instant, a statue of terror. We were hunting caribou, a dozen of us. Only I and one other man survived. We learned two things that terrible night. First, the creature shies from great fire. It seemed pained by the heat of our bonfire. Second, the high-pitched shriek of a ricocheting lead ball made it recoil. It is not invincible. It can be fought. I have sworn to my Maker that I will be ready when it returns. I will found a watch that will not fail. I trace the initials of Amos Stone, the trapper, the first of us. His account is raw, terrified, but filled with a frontiersman's grit. He faced the unknown with a flintlock rifle and a campfire. I have satellites and cryo rounds, and I'm still not sure I have an advantage. My fingers turn the pages, 100 years of history passing in a whisper of paper. I stop at the familiar, cramped handwriting of my grandfather, William Stone. His entry is dated 1924, typed on a portable typewriter and pasted into the book, A Soldier's After-Action Report. November 3rd, 1924. The beast is larger than my father's descriptions, at least 40 feet at the shoulder. Its hide is not fur, but a lattice of crystalline filaments. Standard 30x06 rounds from the Vickers machine gun had no effect, shattering on impact. It took half a case of dynamite to breach the ice shielding its chest. Lost Miller and Shaw when it used the steam from the geothermal vent as a weapon, flash boiling them inside their gear. Its anatomy is alien. The horn fragment we recovered is colder than any earthly substance, maintaining a temperature of -100 degrees Fahrenheit regardless of ambient conditions. Its blood is a phosphorescent slush that freezes instantly. We wounded it, drove it back into its lair with heavy explosives placed at the main fissure. My leg was crushed in a rock slide it caused. A fair trade, I suppose. It is wounded but not dead. One thing troubles me. Father's journal spoke of a single roar, but the sound that shook the peaks tonight. It was a thunderous bellow that seemed to come from two throats at once. A terrible harmony. I pray the next stone has a better answer for that than I did. WS Two Throats. I've read that line 100 times. It always felt like a soldier's battlefield confusion, a trick of mountain acoustics. But tonight, seeing the compass quiver, feeling that deep hum, William's words feel less like an observation and more like a warning. A piece of the puzzle we've missed for a century. Were our ancestors fighting the same thing? Or is it changing? Adapting? My search takes me deeper into the journal to a section I can barely decipher. The entry is from 1724, written in precise Latin by a man who was not a stone. He signed himself only as Frater Valerius. He describes himself as a member of an order dedicated to containing primeval terrors. His language is apocalyptic, describing the Vetriotnar not as a beast, but as a Gehennic engine. He writes of a failed attempt to destroy it using something he calls a resonator acousticus. The entry ends abruptly, stained with what looks like frozen blood, but before it cuts off, there's a detailed diagram. It's a complex device, a series of interlocking rings, and what looks like a massive tuning fork. I close the journal and cross to a hardened pelican case in the corner. Inside, nestled in custom foam, are the relics of our war. There's the horn fragment William recovered, a foot-long shard of black, glassy material that is shockingly, painfully cold to the touch. My suit's temperature gauge reads it at 105 below zero. Next to it are a few twisted pieces of metal, warped by incredible force and heat. They are all that was ever found of Freighter Valerius's expedition, discovered by Amos a century later. The metal isn't steel or iron, it's some unknown alloy. The fragments match the diagram in the journal. This was the acoustic resonator. The plan I'd formulated over the last 10 years was simple. Find the lair, plant enough explosives to collapse the entire glacier on top of it, and entomb it for 10,000 years. A soldier's solution. But William's note about two throats, Valerius's failed sound device, the way the thing seems to intelligently use its environment. It all points to a more complex truth. Brute force failed in 1924. It failed in 1724. Simply using a bigger hammer isn't a strategy. It's arrogance. A new strategy begins to form, built on the ghosts of 100 years. The mission parameters have changed. This isn't a simple search and destroy. It's an intelligence-gathering operation first. We need to understand what we're facing now, in our time. We need to know what's different. I stride out of the command module into the biting cold. My team, Leo, Grizzly, and Finch, stop their work and look at me, their faces lit by the base's floodlights. They can see it in my eyes. "Gear up," I say, my voice flat. "The plan has changed. We're not going in for a kill. We're going on a recon. We need to find its lair, plant sensors, and get samples. We need to know what the hell has been growing in the dark for the last 100 years. My team is a collection of ghosts, men who excelled in the shadows of the world's most dangerous places. They aren't mercenaries. They're acolytes, bound not by money, but by shared experience and an unshakable trust in me. We are all veterans of a world that no longer had a place for us, until I gave them one. Leo Carver, former Delta Force communications and electronic warfare specialist, is the first to nod. He's a quiet, methodical man who moves with an unnerving lack of sound. To him, the electromagnetic spectrum is as real and navigable as a forest. He can hear a whisper in a hurricane or create a bubble of absolute silence a mile wide. He's already deploying a network of his own design. Small, autonomous drones that will daisy-chain off one another to create an unbreakable comms link through miles of rock and ice. "Give me an hour to recalibrate the sensor package for geological acoustics," he says, his voice a low murmur. "I can map the vibrations." Ben Mulligan, who answers only to Grizzly, claps his huge hands together, the sound like a gunshot in the frigid air. A former Navy EOD technician, Grizzly is built like the armored vehicles he used to dismantle. He has a smile that could charm a rattlesnake and a relationship with high explosives that borders on artistic. He sees C4 not as a weapon of destruction, but as a tool for precise, aggressive sculpture. "Recon, huh? Means I get to build some fun new toys? Non-lethal, you said?" He winks. "I can make a flashbang that'll make God blink. And that acoustic resonator idea from the journal? I've been working on a prototype based on your notes. An ultrasonic charge. Won't bring the mountain down, but it should give anything with ears one hell of a migraine." The last member of our quartet is Dr. Eris Finch. He's the only non-operator, a former Air Force pararescueman with a PhD in xenobiology. Finch is wiry, perpetually curious, and the closest thing this expedition has to a conscience. I pulled him in after a mission in the Kunar Valley. where we were the only survivors of an incident involving a cave system and something that defied every law of physics we knew. He saw the world behind the curtain, and instead of recoiling, he dedicated his life to studying it. His job is to be our Spock, to analyze, to theorize, to turn the supernatural into something we can understand, and therefore, something we can kill. Samples, he says, his eyes gleaming with intellectual hunger. Jed, if this thing is geothermal, its cellular structure could be silicon-based. Its blood might be a cryogenic fluid. This could rewrite biology. I pull them into the command module, activating the holographic table. A three-dimensional map of the Winter Crown shimmers into existence, built from satellite scans, ground-penetrating radar, and the faded, hand-drawn charts from the family journal. All right, I begin, pointing to a confluence of geological fault lines. The hum is originating from this nexus, approximately 3 miles beneath the glacier. This corresponds with my great-grandfather's account of the creature's lair. But we're not going in hot. Leo, I want your acoustic sensors deployed in a perimeter here. I draw a circle a mile out from the nexus. I want to know its movement patterns. Grizzly, your job is contingency. We find a way in, you wire it for demolition. But on my command only. Your primary focus is on non-lethal deterrence. Sound, light, thermal spikes. We need to hurt it, not just enrage it. Finch, you're with me. Everything you see, you document. Every spore, every crystal, every pressure change. We need data. I look each of them in the eye. My grandfather's report mentioned 2 throats. My working theory is that we're not dealing with a single entity. It could be a pair, or it could have changed. It has had a century to evolve. It remembers us. It remembers my family. It has learned from past encounters. Assume it is smarter than you are. Assume every step you take is onto ground it has prepared for you. It knows its home territory better than we ever will. The mood in the module is sober. The earlier bravado replaced by a focused intensity. We spend the next few hours gearing up, the process a silent, intricate ballet of professionals. Our equipment is a blend of bleeding-edge military tech and custom modifications born from the journal's lore. The Helios pattern-heated exoskeletons will keep us functional in the insane cold. Our helmets are sealed systems with independent oxygen, their visors networked to show everyone's vitals and tactical data. Our rifles are modified Mjolnir platforms firing the same 50 caliber cryo rounds as my own, each linked to a smart scope that can overlay thermal, electromagnetic, and acoustic signatures onto the visual field. Grizzly loads the underbarrel launchers not with grenades, but with his custom-built acoustic resonators and microwave emitters designed to disorient, not destroy. Grizzly hefts his heavy pack, the frame groaning under the weight of his specialized charges. "You know, Jed," he says, his voice softer than usual. "For a recon mission, this feels an awful lot like we're gearing up to go kick in Satan's front door." "That's because we are, Grizz," I reply, pulling my helmet on and feeling the familiar hiss of the seal. "We're just planning on knocking first this time. We're just planning on knocking first this time." We file out into the blinding white of the polar landscape and board the Snow Strider, a heavily modified Hägglunds BVS-10. Its twin-car, articulated body, and wide rubber tracks are the only things that can reliably navigate this terrain. With a roar of its diesel engine, the machine lurches forward, its headlights cutting a pathetic swath through the infinite darkness. We are 4 men, a tiny bubble of warmth and light, heading into the heart of a frozen, 100-year-old nightmare. The snow strider chewed its way up the glacier, its powerful engine a dull roar against the shrieking wind. Inside, we were a world apart, shielded from the elements. But the elements, it seemed, were not content to be ignored. "This is weird," Leo muttered from the co-pilot seat, his eyes glued to a tablet displaying meteorological data. "The regional forecast called for clear skies, high pressure system parked right over us, but we're heading into a complete whiteout. Wind speed is gusting up to 90 miles per hour. This isn't a storm, Jed. It's localized, like the mountain is generating its own weather system." It was the first sign. The Vetriotnar was influencing its environment, turning the very air into a weapon. The world outside the armored viewports dissolved into a churning vortex of snow. An hour later, we broke through the storm front into an area of eerie calm. The wind died completely. The snow stopped, and we saw it. We were in a wide, bowl-shaped valley, and the entire valley floor was littered with bones. Thousands of them. The skeletons of caribou, Arctic foxes, wolverines, even several massive polar bears. They were arranged in strange, almost deliberate piles, picked clean and bleached white against the blue ice. "Stop here," Finch said, his voice tight. We geared up and stepped outside. The silence was absolute, unnerving. Finch knelt by the carcass of a huge male polar bear, his sample kit already open. The skeleton was perfectly articulated, as if the bear had simply laid down and died. There were no marks of teeth or claws on the bones. "My God," Finch breathed, holding a portable scanner over a femur. "There's no marrow. It's not just gone, the entire cancellous bone structure has been transmuted. It's crystalline." He chipped off a small piece with a geological hammer. It flaked away like brittle glass. Whatever did this didn't eat them. It's as if it flash froze them from the inside out, sucking the very energy, the very life, out of their cells. This isn't a feeding ground. It's a graveyard. A low, pulsing thrum suddenly filled our headsets. "I've got it," Leo said, his voice tense. "A low-frequency acoustic signal, subsonic. It's not mechanical, it's organic, rhythmic, like a goddamn heart beating once every 20 seconds. The signal was playing havoc with our electronics. The Snow Strider's GPS was flickering, unable to get a lock. My own helmet's compass was spinning uselessly. I pulled out the old ivory compass. Its needle was steady, pointing directly across the bone field toward the far wall of the valley. The old ways were proving more reliable than the new. "Leo, launch a drone," I ordered. "I want eyes over that ridge." A small, quad-rotor drone lifted silently from the roof of the Strider, its camera feed appearing on our HUDs. It sped across the valley, the bone field a grotesque mosaic below. As it crested the ridge, the feed filled with a breathtaking view of a massive ice wall, a sheer cliff of frozen water hundreds of feet high. And then the feed flickered. A shape, colossal and white, blurred past the lens, so fast it was little more than a smear of motion. The feed dissolved into static. "Signal lost," Leo stated, his voice devoid of emotion. Something took it out. We were being watched. The thought sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. This thing knew we were here. We pressed on, leaving the bone field behind, the rhythmic, subsonic heartbeat growing stronger in our ears. After another mile, Grizzly, who was in the lead, held up a fist, signaling a halt. "Jed, you need to see this." I came up beside him and looked down. There, pressed into the ice, was a track. But it was unlike any track I had ever seen. It was immense, easily 15 feet long and 8 feet wide. But it wasn't a footprint. There were no toes, no heel. It was a perfectly smooth ovular depression. The ice at its edges melted and refrozen into a glassy, razor-sharp rim. It looked as if someone had pressed a gigantic red-hot iron into the glacier. "Geothermal," Finch whispered in awe. "It's literally melting its way through the ice as it moves. The energy required to do that." His voice trailed off. This proved the core of the family legend, but it was the next discovery that truly terrified me. We followed the tracks, a series of these immense heat-pressed scars on the landscape. They led us towards a narrow pass between two towering seracs. Grizzly, with a sapper's ingrained caution, stopped us again. He took out a long, thin probe and carefully pushed it into the snowpack ahead of us. It sunk without resistance, its entire 10-foot length disappearing. He looked back at us, his face pale behind his visor. "It's a crevasse. A big one. At least 50 feet across and God knows how deep. It's been deliberately covered with a thin snow bridge." Our satellite maps, taken just 12 hours before, showed this area as solid ice. The trackmaker hadn't just walked this way. It had created a trap. It had been herding us, trying to funnel us into this ambush. The quiet confidence we'd felt at the base was gone, replaced by a raw, primal fear. We weren't the hunters here. We were mice in a maze, and the Minotaur was rewriting the floor plan as we went. We retreated carefully, backing away from the pass. We set up a fortified camp, deploying Leo's sensors in a wide perimeter. As the alien rhythm of the mountain's heart beat its slow, steady pulse around us, we understood. This wasn't just a monster, it was a genius, and the long polar night had only just begun. For 2 days we hunkered down, studying the creature's movements through Leo's acoustic sensors. It moved in a predictable circular pattern around a central point, a silent guardian patrolling its domain. The subsonic heartbeat was the key. Triangulating the signal, we pinpointed its origin. A massive fissure hidden at the base of the central peak, the very heart of the Winter Crown. Leaving the snowstrider behind, we proceeded on foot, the rhythmic pulse growing from a sound in our headsets to a vibration in the soles of our boots. The entrance to the lair was a jagged wound in the glacier, a crack wide enough to drive our vehicle through. A constant plume of thick white vapor billowed from its depths, smelling faintly of sulfur and cold stone. The ice around the entrance was carved with impossible patterns, intricate, symmetrical lines that looked less like natural formations and more like a form of runic calligraphy or vast, frozen circuitry. "It's shaping the ice," Finch murmured, running a gloved hand over one of the swirling patterns. "This isn't random. This is architecture." We roped up and began our descent. The moment we passed the threshold, the world changed. The screaming wind vanished, replaced by a profound, echoing silence. The oppressive cold outside gave way to a humid, almost tropical warmth. We were inside the beast's body, or at least its nest. The tunnel didn't slope gently. It descended in a series of perfectly cut, almost 90-degree drops, connected by long, straight corridors. The walls were smooth as polished glass. This wasn't a cave. It was a constructed place. After a descent of nearly 1,000 feet, we emerged into a cavern so vast our helmet lamps couldn't find the ceiling. And it was here that we saw the source of the lair's faint, internal light. The chamber was a forest, a garden of colossal crystals that grew from the floor like luminous trees. They ranged in size from several feet to towering monoliths 50 feet high, each one pulsing with a soft, internal blue-white light. The air hummed with a palpable energy. "It's storing energy," Finch said, his voice filled with a scientist's rapture. "These crystals? They're like biological batteries, drawing power from the geothermal vent and holding it. Look at the lattice structure. It's flawless." He tapped one of the smaller crystals with his hammer. It rang with a pure harmonic tone, but didn't even scratch. Harder than diamond. As we moved deeper into the crystal garden, I saw them. Etched into the cavern walls were drawings, ancient petroglyphs far older than the ones on the exterior. The earliest images depicted small, stick-like human figures bowing down before a single massive shape, the Colossus. They were bringing it offerings, laying dead animals at its feet. It was a scene of worship. But as we moved along the wall, the narrative changed. The drawings became more frantic, more violent. They depicted a battle. The human figures were now armed with spears and torches, and the creature they were fighting was not alone. Clear as day, etched into the ice by forgotten hands, were two colossal figures standing back to back. One was larger, broader, the one we had seen tracks of. The other was sleeker, more serpentine. My grandfather wasn't confused. He wasn't tricked by echoes, he was right. There were two of them. In the center of the vast chamber, we found what we were looking for. A massive, gaping maw in the rock floor, a direct conduit to the planet's molten heart. Steam and heat poured from it in a steady rhythmic exhalation, in time with the subsonic pulse we'd been tracking. The creature, or creatures, had been sleeping on their power source, recharging for a century. But now, the vent was flaring, the exhalations coming faster. It was preparing for a full eruption of activity, and then we saw the bodies. Tucked away in an alcove near the vent, preserved by the strange, dry air, were the remains of two men. Their clothing, heavy wool and canvas parkas, was from another era. Their gear was antiquated, a brass and wood ice axe, a shattered pair of snow goggles. Lying next to them was a rusted, heavy-caliber machine gun, a Vickers, just like the one mentioned in my grandfather's journal. These were Miller and Shaw. The men my grandfather had lost, the men he thought were flash-boiled. They hadn't died outside. They had made it in here. Among their remains, I found a mangled piece of equipment that made my blood run cold. It was a heavily built metal spear, almost like a whaling harpoon, but its tip was a complex array of wires and sonic emitters. This was another of William's projects, one he'd never mentioned in the journal. A weapon designed to attack with sound. His plan had been far more sophisticated than just dynamite, and it had failed. "Jed," Leo's voice was sharp in my headset. "The entrance, the way we came in." I looked back. The long, smooth tunnel we had descended was gone. A solid wall of new ice, thick and impenetrable, had sealed it shut. As we watched, other tunnels and corridors began to close, the ice flowing and freezing with unnatural speed. Booming, grinding sounds echoed through the cavern as our escape routes were systematically cut off. The creature hadn't been patrolling its territory. It had been waiting for us. It had lured us into its home, into the heart of its power. It had locked us in its pantry. From the darkness of the largest, unsealed tunnel, a presence emerged. It didn't stomp or crash. It flowed into the vast chamber with a terrifying, liquid grace. The thing from the petroglyphs, the creature of my family's nightmares. It was real. It stood a full 40 feet tall at the shoulder, a horrifying fusion of what looked like white fur, corded muscle, and glacial ice. Its hide wasn't hair, but a dense coat of the same crystalline filaments William had described. each one catching the blue light of the crystal garden and refracting it into 1,000 glittering points. 2 massive horns, like polished obsidian, swept back from its skull, glowing from within with a dull orange heat. Its face was a nightmare of alien angles, and where its eyes should have been were 2 orbs of cold white fire, burning with an ancient and profound intelligence. It let out a roar, and the sound was not just heard but felt. A physical blow of sound pressure that vibrated through the floor, through my bones, and into my teeth. Training and instinct took over. "Open fire! Aim for the joints!" I yelled, raising my Mjolnir rifle. Our 4 rifles cracked in unison, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. The 50 caliber cryo rounds streaked across the cavern and slammed into the Colossus. They didn't bounce. They hit the crystalline hide and shattered, the cryogel splashing across its surface and flash freezing ineffectually. It was like throwing snowballs at a battleship. "Grizzly, thermobaric," I commanded. Grizzly didn't hesitate. He raised his grenade launcher and fired. The round hit the creature square in the chest and detonated with a deafening whoomph, sucking the air from the cavern before exploding outward in a wave of fire and pressure. The blast staggered the beast, and its white fur was instantly charred black. For a moment we thought we had it. But then, an icy mist enveloped the wound, and before our eyes the crystalline filaments began to regrow, pushing out the scorched tissue, the white frost spreading and hardening until the hide was pristine again. It healed in seconds. The Colossus was not a berserker. It was a tactician. It slammed a massive, clawed hand against the cavern wall, and a shower of razor-sharp ice shards, some as large as cars, rained down on our position, forcing us to scatter. It stomped its foot, and a fissure cracked open in the floor, venting a scalding cloud of geothermal steam that obscured its form. In the confusion, Leo was separated from the group. The monster moved with impossible speed, a white blur in the steam. It didn't try to crush him. It simply swatted him with the back of its hand, a contemptuous, dismissive gesture. Leo was thrown 30 feet through the air, his body ragdolling before slamming into one of the giant crystals with a sickening crunch. He collapsed in a heap, his leg bent at an unnatural angle. Seeing my opening, I took a knee, aimed, and squeezed the trigger. I ignored the armored torso and put a round right into the creature's shoulder socket, where muscle met bone. This time, there was a result. The beast roared in pain, a higher-pitched sound of genuine agony. The cryo round had punched through. Instead of blood, a glowing, viscous fluid like liquid nitrogen poured from the wound, freezing the moment it hit the air. Its pain turned to fury. It fixed its burning white eyes on me, and then it opened its mouth and roared again. But this roar was different. It was a call. And from a dark tunnel on the opposite side of the cavern, a call answered. It was a lower resonant cry, a harmony to the first creature's shriek of pain. My blood turned to ice. The team froze, our faces pale behind our visors. The petroglyphs hadn't been a history lesson. They were a warning. The legends were true. It was all true. There were 2 of them. "We have to get out of here now!" I yelled, my voice cracking. "Grizzly, that western wall, the one Finch said was geologically unstable. Blow it!" Grizzly, his face set in a grim mask, nodded and planted a shaped charge against the cavern wall. I ran to Leo, hauling him to his feet, his arm slung over my shoulder as he screamed in pain. The world exploded behind us. Grizzly's charge blew a hole in the side of the mountain, opening a new tunnel to the outside world. Freezing, blessedly cold wind blasted into the superheated cavern. We stumbled through the opening back into the familiar hell of the Alaskan night. I turned back to provide covering fire, and I saw Finch. He had been delayed, trying to grab a sample of the creature's frozen blood. The Colossus was on him in a heartbeat. It didn't bite him, didn't crush him. It gently, almost delicately, picked him up in its massive claws. Finch struggled for a moment and then went limp. The last thing I saw before I scrambled away from the collapsing tunnel was the giant carrying our friend, our scientist, back into the darkness of the lair, like a prize to be studied. We ran, leaving him behind. We had no choice. We had come as hunters, armed with the best technology and the knowledge of generations. We left as prey, broken, beaten, and one man short. The retreat to the Snow Strider was a nightmare of controlled panic. We moved as fast as we could, hauling a semi-conscious Leo between us, his legs splinted, but the pain still making him cry out with every jostle. We didn't look back. We didn't dare. The sounds of the mountain shifting and groaning behind us were all the motivation we needed. Back at Watchtower, the sterile safety of the medical module felt like a different planet. Grizzly and I worked on Leo, injecting him with morphine and stabilizing his shattered femur in a pneumatic cast. He was out of the fight, his body broken and his spirit not far behind. But the real casualty was Finch. The empty bunk in the barracks was a silent, screaming accusation. Guilt was a physical entity, a cold, heavy thing sitting in my chest. I had led them here. I had brought Finch, a scientist, into a war he wasn't meant to fight. His intellectual curiosity, the very thing that made him so brilliant, had gotten him killed. I had failed. Failed my team, failed my oath, failed the generations of Stones who had successfully done this duty before me. I locked myself in the command module and opened the journal, the vellum pages feeling like an indictment. I read my grandfather's words, my great-great-grandfather's words. They wrote of fear of loss, but always of victory. They had faced the beast and driven it back. I had faced it and run, leaving a good man to die. The weight of their legacy was crushing me. Where had I gone wrong? What had they known that I didn't? Jed! Leo's voice, strained with pain, crackled over the intercom. You need to see this. I found him propped up in his bunk, a ruggedized tablet in his hands, his face pale with sweat, but his eyes blazing with fierce intensity. Finch's suit telemetry, he explained. It kept transmitting for 37 seconds after they took him. Most of it is corrupted data, but I managed to pull the last audio file and a bioscan packet from his wrist monitor. He played the audio. It was mostly static, the sound of tearing metal and Finch's ragged, terrified breathing. But then, in his last moments, his voice came through, calm and analytical, the scientist overriding the terrified man. Not two separate entities. Finch's voice rasped, distorted by the static. Symbiotic, or a reproductive pair. The big one, the male, it radiates heat, geothermal. But the air around it, it's causing a pressure drop. It's a closed system. One produces heat, the other must produce cold. A perfect thermodynamic balance. To beat them, you have to break the loop, disrupt the balance. The recording ended with a sickening crunch. Leo swiped the screen, bringing up the bioscan data. He managed to get a reading of the cavern's atmosphere just before they took him, he said, pointing to a series of complex molecular chains. It's saturated with complex organic compounds, spores. And look at this. He highlighted a waveform. The two roars. They're not just calls. They're on harmonizing frequencies. When they roar together, they create a resonant frequency that seems to affect the local environment. It's how they create those storms. The pieces slammed into place in my mind with the force of a physical blow. Finch's last words, William's two throats, the ancient petroglyphs, the perfectly balanced hot and cold system. It was all one big picture we had been too blind to see. A thermal entity, the male, and a cryogenic entity, the female. One absorbed energy, the other radiated absolute zero. Together they were a perfectly balanced, self-sustaining engine of destruction. We had attacked only one half of the equation, the warrior, while the other, the more subtle and hidden partner, remained in the shadows. A new plan, a desperate, suicidal, beautiful plan, bloomed in the ruins of my despair. "They're a system," I said, thinking aloud. "We can't kill them one at a time. It's like trying to kill a fire by only throwing water on half of it. We have to hit them both, at the same time, but with their own weapons." My eyes met Leo's. "We use heat against the cold one, and cold against the hot one. We turn their own perfect balance against them." My gaze fell on the relics case. Inside lay the broken pieces of Valerius's resonator and the damaged harpoon from William's doomed men. The answers had been here all along, whispers from the ghosts of failed hunts. "Leo," I said, my voice hard with new resolve, "can you and Grizzly get that 1924 harpoon working? I don't need it to fire. I need it to broadcast. I want you to rig it to Grizzly's acoustic charges. Create a bomb that will scream on the exact resonant frequency Finch recorded." Leo nodded slowly, a grim smile touching his lips. "It'll be a one-shot deal. But yeah, we can make it sing." "Good," I said, turning to leave. "Because I'm going to need a way to get both of them in the same place at the same time." Grizzly looked at me from the doorway, having heard everything. "And how are we going to do that?" "They know my family," I replied, grabbing my rifle. "The Vetriotnar have been fighting stones for centuries. They can probably smell my bloodline from a mile away. I'm the bait. I'll draw the big one out. You, Grizz, will take the acoustic bomb and our remaining cryo charges and give his girlfriend a reason to come out and play." It was a plan born of grief and desperation, and it was the only chance we had left. The wind on the glacier was a physical manifestation of loneliness. Dressed in my exosuit, armed with only my Mjolnir rifle, a flare gun, and the ivory compass, I walked back toward the beast's territory. I moved without stealth, my magnetic boots crunching loudly on the ice, my heat signature a blazing beacon in the endless cold. I was a single, defiant nerve ending, daring the monster to come and crush me. For hours, nothing happened. The silence was a heavy blanket, broken only by my own breathing and the whisper of the wind. Then, the subsonic hum returned, a vibration that started in my feet and worked its way up my spine. It was closer now, much closer. He appeared on a ridge a half-mile away, a silhouette of white against the star-dusted black of the polar night. The male, the hot one. He didn't charge. He just stood there, his burning white eyes fixed on me. He knew who I was. This was personal. Thus began the most terrifying game of cat and mouse I have ever played. He didn't rush me. He stalked me. He would disappear behind a ridge of ice, only to reappear moments later from a different direction, closer each time. He was testing me, hurting me, using his perfect knowledge of the terrain to cut off my lines of retreat, to channel me toward a place of his choosing. But I had a place of my own in mind. Back at Watchtower, Leo coordinated the ballet. "He's flanking you, Jed. Moving west-northwest. Grizzly, you are a go. Repeat. You are a go. Move to insertion point Alpha." Miles away, Grizzly, his massive frame loaded with explosives, began his silent approach to the main entrance of the lair. He moved with the slow, deliberate grace of a man who knows any misstep could be his last, his breath misting in the frigid air. He was my hammer. I was the anvil. The psychological pressure was immense. The male began to play with me, using the low-frequency resonance Finch had discovered. The air filled with phantom sounds. I heard the crackle of my grandfather's hearth fire, the scream of Leo as his leg broke. Most horribly, I heard Finch's voice, clear as day in my helmet, crying out my name for help. I knew it was an illusion, a telepathic or acoustic trick, but the cold sweat that beaded on my forehead was real. This creature wasn't just a predator, it was a sadist. But I had my own ghosts. I focused on the weight of the rifle, the familiar feel of the ivory compass in my pouch. I was a stone. This was my birthright, my curse. I pushed the phantom voices away and focused on my goal. A vast frozen lake nestled in a crater-like basin. From our surveys, I knew the ice here was thin, covering a deep subglacial chasm. This was our killing field. I let him chase me onto the open expanse of the lake. I was completely exposed, a single target on a flat white plate. He rose up on the far shore, sensing the finality of the confrontation. He was done playing. He lowered his massive head and charged, his steps like seismic events, the ice cracking and groaning under his immense weight. When he reached the center of the lake, I raised the flare gun, pointed it straight up and fired. A single point of crimson light shot into the black sky, a bloody star hanging over the frozen world. It was the signal. Grizzly, in position at the mouth of the lair, saw it. "Showtime," he muttered into his comms. He pressed the detonator. There wasn't a massive explosion. It was a series of sharp, contained blasts. Grizzly hadn't used high explosives. He'd used his custom cryocharges, detonating them deep inside the warm, humid entrance of the lair. The effect was instantaneous. The temperature inside the tunnel network plummeted by hundreds of degrees in seconds, a wave of absolute zero washing into the creature's nest. A new roar echoed from the mountain, a sound of pure, unadulterated female fury. The lair had been violated. Her partner was in a fight. From the fissure, the second creature emerged. She was different from the male. Sleeker, almost serpentine, her hide a dark, mottled gray like storm clouds. Where he radiated heat, she radiated a visible aura of cold, a shimmering wave of frost that instantly coated the rocks around her. Her eyes were not burning embers, but chips of deep blue ice. And she was moving fast, a river of frozen rage flowing across the glacier toward the red flare, toward her mate, toward me. When the two behemoths met in the center of the frozen lake, reality itself seemed to buckle. Their individual auras, one of intense heat and one of profound cold, clashed and reacted, creating an instantaneous, localized superstorm. The wind exploded from a dead calm to a 100-mile-an-hour hurricane, whipping snow and ice shards into a horizontal blizzard that reduced visibility to zero. The very air crackled with thermal energy. "They're creating a feedback loop," Leo's voice shouted in my headset, distorted by static. "Jed, Grizzly, you have to hit them now." From our prepared positions on opposite sides of the basin, we opened fire. Grizzly, wielding an experimental railgun we'd held in reserve, sent a hypervelocity slug packed with magnesium roaring toward the female. It struck her flank and detonated, engulfing her in a sun-white fireball of incandescent heat. She shrieked, a sound of sizzling metal and agony, as the intense warmth warred with her cryogenic nature. At the same instant, I sighted on the male and emptied my magazine of cryo rounds into the wound I'd given him earlier in the cavern. The sub-zero gel hit his superheated flesh, and the thermal shock was catastrophic. Ice, thick as a car door, exploded across his shoulder and chest, encasing the limb, and causing him to stumble and roar in a fury of pain and confusion. Finch was right. We had broken the loop. Their perfect symbiosis was shattered, their own powers now poisons to one another. The storm faltered, the wind howling in discordant notes as their resonating harmony was broken. They thrashed blindly, disoriented, their rage now directed at the unseen sources of their pain. "Now, Leo, light it up!" I yelled. From Watchtower, Leo pressed a key. The acoustic bomb Grizzly had planted, built around the core of William Stone's 1924 harpoon, activated. It didn't explode. It broadcasted. An unholy, piercing shriek of ultra-high frequency sound flooded the basin, a physical spike of noise driven directly into our skulls. Even with acoustic dampeners, it was agony. For the creatures, it was a cataclysm. They staggered, clutching their heads, their movements becoming clumsy and uncoordinated. The ice on the lake, already fractured by their weight and the thermal chaos, began to give way. Huge cracks webbed across the surface. This was our only chance. "I'm going in," I said, sliding down the snowy embankment onto the treacherous ice. "I have to get closer." The male, maddened by pain and sound, ignored me. It located the source of the magnesium flare that had wounded its mate and charged Grizzly's position. My friend was desperately trying to reload the railgun's massive power cells, but he wasn't going to make it. I saw him look up, see the mountain of enraged flesh bearing down on him, and make a soldier's choice. "For Finch," Grizzly said calmly over the comms. He unstrapped the 2 remaining blocks of thermite compound from his pack. He didn't throw them. He armed them and held them to his chest. The monster was on him, and Grizzly became a star. The explosion wasn't loud, just a brilliant silent flash of white heat that vaporized him and the creature's entire front half in an instant. It was the bravest, most terrible thing I have ever seen. His sacrifice bought me the time I needed. The female, screeching in horror at the death of her mate, was momentarily distracted. I sprinted across the groaning, cracking ice, my boots skidding. In my hands, I held the last relic, the original ivory compass to which I had strapped my last cryo charge. It wasn't much, but it was all I had left. She turned, her eyes of blue ice finding me. She lunged. But I was already there. I jammed the makeshift bomb against her chest, right where her heart should be, and vaulted backward. I hit the detonator on my wrist as my feet left her body. There was no sound, just a dull thump and a flash of intense cold. The cryo charge ruptured, injecting its payload directly into her core. She froze from the inside out, a wave of crystalline ice spreading through her veins, her shriek of rage turning into the tinkle of 1,000,000 tiny ice crystals. The lake finally gave up the ghost. With a groan that shook the foundations of the world, the entire sheet of ice collapsed inward, plunging the 2 dying, shattered monsters into the black, churning water of the subglacial abyss. The storm vanished. The acoustic shriek died. The subsonic hum ceased. And for the first time in a century, the crown of winter was silent. I stood alone on the jagged edge of the new chasm, the silence of physical presence, more deafening than the storm that had preceded it. My body ached with 1,000 small injuries. My ears rang, but I was alive. I looked across the abyss to the blackened scorch mark on the ridge where Ben Grizzly Mulligan had made his last stand. I raised a trembling hand and gave him a slow, deliberate salute. A soldier's farewell to a brother. The distant sound of rotors was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. The rescue chopper Leo had called for roared over the ridge, its searchlight cutting a brilliant cone through the darkness. A litter was lowered for Leo, who they picked up from Watchtower, and a rope for me. As I was winched into the warm, loud cabin, I looked down one last time at the scarred, broken landscape, our battlefield. The flight back to Fairbanks was silent. Leo was sedated, his face a mask of pain even in sleep. I sat by the window, the ancestral journal open on my lap. I turned to the last blank page, took a pen, and began to write. My script was nothing like the elegant prose of Amos or the precise reports of William. It was the shaky scrawl of a man who had seen too much. January 12th. The Crown is silent. Vetriotnar is dead. Both of them. The cycle is broken. But the cost was too high. Finch is gone. Grizzly is gone. They died to buy this victory. Their names now written in this book alongside all the others. Finch's mind and Grizzly's heart were weapons as powerful as any rifle. Let no one forget that. We were wrong. It was never just one creature, it was a pair, a system. We only won by turning their own nature against them. I don't feel like a victor. I feel like a survivor. I feel empty. I did what I swore to my grandfather I would do. But I feel no pride. I paused, my pen hovering over the page. I wrote one last secret truth in the lair. Before we were trapped, I saw something else deep in an alcove near the geothermal vent, something the others missed. It looked like a clutch of eggs, or spores, large, ovoid shapes, encased in the same black glassy material as the creature's horns. They were frozen deep within the ancient ice. I don't know if Grizzly's final blast at the entrance, or the subsequent collapse, was enough to destroy them. I don't know if the cycle is truly broken, or if I have merely reset the clock. I closed the book. My duty, as I had understood it, was over. But sitting there, watching the first hint of dawn paint the eastern sky, I understood. The oath wasn't just about hunting. It was about watching. The long watch was not over. It had just entered a new phase. My war was not finished. It had just become colder, quieter. The helicopter landed as the sun finally crested the horizon, bathing the world in a fragile golden light. I pulled out the old ivory compass. For the first time in my life, its needle was still. It pointed calmly, resolutely, to the magnetic north. For now. Epilogue 6 months later. The air in the laboratory doesn't smell of cold and ozone, but of sterilized metal and conditioned air. It's a private facility, deep underground, funded by the considerable and quiet Stone family fortune. I stand beside Leo, who now walks with a slight limp and a cane made from a carbon fiber alloy. On a large monitor before us is a highly magnified image. It's a cross-section of the crystalline sample Finch managed to grab before. For months, it has been inert, a beautiful but dead piece of alien geology. But now, under the electron microscope, something has changed. Deep within the crystal's flawless lattice, a single microscopic cell, a dark mote in the glowing structure, is pulsing. It is a slow, rhythmic beat, almost imperceptible, like a tiny sleeping heart. The work is just beginning. The watch continues.